February 17th, 1974, Fort Worth, Texas. The clock in Rodney McCoy's car read 12:35 a.m. 17-year-old Rodney sat in the driver's seat of his 1972 Grand Prix in the parking lot of Brunswick Ridgely Bowl, a popular bowling alley in West Fort Worth. Beside him, his girlfriend Carla Walker, also 17, was still glowing from a Valentine's Day dance they'd just attended at Weston Hills High School. They'd stopped at the bowling alley to use the restrooms. Now they were sitting in the car, talking, stealing kisses, reluctant for the perfect night to end. Rodney never saw the man approaching from behind. The passenger door suddenly jerked open. A dark figure loomed. Before Rodney could react, something hard cracked against his skull. Once, twice, 3 times. Pain exploded through Rodney's head. His vision blurred. Through the haze, he saw a man dragging Carla from the car. She was fighting, screaming, "Rodney, go get my dad." Carla's voice pierced the night. "Rodney, get my dad." Then Rodney saw the gun, pointed at his face. "You move and I'll kill you," the man snarled. Another blow to Rodney's head. Darkness swallowed him. When Rodney regained consciousness, he didn't know how much time had passed. Carla was gone. Blood poured down his face from the gashes on his head. The passenger door stood open. The parking lot was empty, silent except for the distant hum of traffic on Interstate 30. He stumbled from the car, desperate, terrified, calling Carla's name into the void. She didn't answer. Rodney drove to Carla's house and pounded on the door. When her father, Jim Walker, opened it and saw Rodney's blood-covered face, he knew instantly that something terrible had happened. "Where's Carla?" "She's gone. Someone took her. He had a gun. He hit me. I couldn't stop him." Jim Walker called the Fort Worth Police Department at 1:35 a.m. By 2 a.m., a massive search was underway. Officers combed the bowling alley parking lot. They found a .22 caliber magazine, part of a Ruger pistol, lying on the asphalt near where Rodney's car had been parked. They searched the surrounding area. They interviewed witnesses. They broadcast alerts. But Carla Walker had vanished into the Fort Worth night. 3 days later, on February 20th, 1974, a construction worker spotted something in a culvert near Benbrook Lake, about 30 minutes south of Fort Worth. It was a young woman's body, discarded like trash in a drainage ditch. Carla Jan Walker had been found. The medical examiner's report was horrifying. Carla had been held captive for 2 days. She'd been tortured, beaten, raped repeatedly, and injected with morphine before finally being strangled to death. Someone had kept this 17-year-old girl alive just to inflict unimaginable pain. The investigation consumed Fort Worth Police Department. Every lead was pursued. Every tip investigated. Months turned to years. Years turned to decades. And Carla Walker's murder remained unsolved. For 46 years, her family lived with questions that had no answers. Her boyfriend, Rodney McCoy, lived with guilt that wouldn't fade. Her community lived with fear that never quite disappeared. Until 2020, when a DNA breakthrough would finally give a name to the monster who'd stolen Carla's life on a cold February night in 1974. For 46 years, the murder of Carla Walker haunted Fort Worth, Texas. One teenage girl, stolen from a Valentine's Day dance. One family destroyed by unimaginable violence. One community forever changed. And one killer who walked free for nearly half a century, living in the same city where he committed his horrific crime. Before we continue this heartbreaking story, take a second to hit subscribe and like this video. Your support helps bring these forgotten stories to light, and the algorithm gods will make sure you don't miss any future uploads. The abduction and murder of Carla Walker wasn't just another crime in Fort Worth. It became the defining case of an era, a before and after moment that shattered the city's sense of safety. In September 2020, 46 years after Carla was murdered, Fort Worth police would finally arrest a suspect. It wasn't a stranger from out of town. It wasn't a drifter passing through. It wasn't someone who'd moved away and hidden in another state. It was a Fort Worth man who'd lived in the city the entire time. Someone who'd been interviewed by police just weeks after Carla's murder in 1974. Someone who'd passed a polygraph test and been cleared. Someone who'd walked past Carla Walker's memorial, who'd lived his life, raised a family, gone to work every day, all while Carla's family suffered, all while Rodney McCoy replayed that night in his nightmares, all while Fort Worth police carried the weight of an unsolved murder. What this case reveals: the devastating randomness of violent crime, the persistence of a brother who never stopped searching for justice, the revolutionary power of genetic genealogy to solve decades-old cases, the courage of a boyfriend who survived and testified 47 years later. Fort Worth in 1974 was a city on the cusp of growth, moving beyond its cowdown roots toward becoming a major metropolitan area. Western Hills High School was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. Valentine's Day dances were innocent, safe, normal. After February 17, 1974, that innocence died. Parents stopped letting their teenage daughters date. High school parking lots no longer felt safe. The randomness of Carla's abduction, snatched from her boyfriend's car in a well-lit public place, meant nowhere was truly safe. The Fort Worth Star-Telegram ran headlines for weeks. The case dominated local news. Tips poured in, but as months passed without an arrest, fear calcified into a grim acceptance. For 46 years, Carla Walker's murder remained an open wound in Fort Worth's collective memory. The most chilling fact about this case: the killer was interviewed by police in April 1974, just 2 months after Carla's murder. He owned a .22 Ruger pistol that matched the magazine found at the crime scene. But he claimed the gun had been stolen. He passed a polygraph test, and without forensic evidence to contradict him, he was cleared. He went on living his life for 46 more years before DNA technology finally revealed the truth. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below. I'm always fascinated to see how far these stories travel and how they connect us across distances. Today we'll walk through the events of February 17, 1974. We'll trace 46 years of grief, determination, and investigative persistence. And we'll reveal how cutting-edge DNA technology and one family's refusal to give up finally brought justice to Carla Walker. This is a story of innocence destroyed, hope sustained, and justice that took nearly half a century to find. Fort Worth, Texas in 1974 was a city in transition. With a population approaching 400,000, Fort Worth was shedding its cowtown image and emerging as a major metropolitan center. The stockyard still operated, reminding everyone of the city's cattle drive past, but modern high-rises were rising downtown. Interstate 30 connected Fort Worth to Dallas, creating the Metroplex. Western Hills High School sat in West Fort Worth, a solidly middle-class area where families knew their neighbors and kids walked to school. The school had about 2,000 students, big enough to have cliques, but small enough that everyone recognized each other in the halls. This was Carla Walker's world, a world that felt safe, predictable, and full of promise. Carla was born on June 23, 1956, to Jim and Shirley Walker. She was one of 4 children in a close-knit family that lived in the Ridgely Hills neighborhood of Fort Worth. From an early age, Carla stood out. She was bright, popular, full of energy. She had that effortless charisma that made people want to be around her. Carla was just vibrant. Her brother Jim Walker Jr. would recall decades later. She lit up rooms. She made friends easily. Everyone loved her. At Western Hills High School, Carla was a junior in the spring of 1974. She was involved in school activities, had a tight circle of friends, and was looking forward to senior year and beyond. She was pretty, with long dark hair and a warm smile that appeared in every photo. But it was her personality that people remembered. She was kind, funny, loyal to her friends. She was the kind of person who made you feel special. One of her classmates said, "When Carla talked to you, she really listened. You weren't just another face in the hallway." At 17, Carla had her whole life ahead of her. College, career, marriage, children, all the milestones that seemed inevitable for a girl with so much potential. Rodney McCoy was a senior at Western Hills High School in 1974. He was a football player, not the star, but a solid player who loved the game and the camaraderie of the team. Rodney and Carla had been dating for about a year. They were that couple everyone recognized, always together in the halls. sitting at the same lunch table, going to games and dances as a unit. They were really good together, a friend remembered. Not dramatic or anything, just solid. You could tell they really cared about each other. Rodney was protective of Carla. He walked her to her car after school. He made sure she got home safe. He was, by all accounts, a good boyfriend. Neither of them could have imagined that on February 17th, 1974, Rodney would watch helplessly as someone dragged Carla from his car, that he'd be knocked unconscious while Carla screamed for him to get her dad, that he'd spend the rest of his life replaying those moments, wondering if he could have done something different. Carla and Rodney's relationship was typical for high school sweethearts in 1974. They went to football games. They studied together. They went to movies and dances. The Valentine's Day dance on February 16th, 1974, was at the Weston Hills High School gym. It was decorated with red and pink streamers, hearts cut from construction paper, the whole romantic setup. Carla wore a dark dress. Rodney wore slacks and a button-down shirt. They danced, they laughed, they hung out with friends. It was a perfect night. The kind of night you look back on years later with nostalgia. They left the dance around midnight. Rodney drove Carla around for a bit, that classic teenage thing of not wanting the night to end. They stopped at Brunswick Ridgely Bowl. The bowling alley had restrooms that were accessible from outside even when the alley was closed. It was a common stop for teenagers. After using the restrooms, they sat in Rodney's car in the parking lot, talking, kissing, making plans for the next weekend. Just two teenagers in love, parked in a well-lit public parking lot, feeling completely safe. The attack came without warning. Rodney McCoy would later describe it in testimony that was chilling in its simplicity. I didn't see him coming. The door just opened, and then he was hitting me. The assailant struck Rodney with a blunt object, possibly the pistol itself, 3 times in rapid succession. Blood poured from gashes on Rodney's head. His vision blurred. Through the haze of pain, he saw the man dragging Carla from the passenger seat. She fought. She clawed at him. She screamed, "Rodney, go get my dad." Those would be the last words Rodney ever heard Carla say. The man pointed a gun at Rodney's face. "You move and I'll kill you." Another blow knocked Rodney unconscious. When Rodney came to, he didn't know how long he'd been out. Minutes? Longer? The passenger door stood open. Carla was gone. The parking lot was empty. Rodney's head throbbed. Blood soaked his shirt. But all he could think was, where's Carla? He drove straight to the Walker house on Ridgely Drive. He pounded on the door until Jim Walker answered. The sight of Rodney, blood-covered, panicked, alone, told Jim everything he needed to know before a single word was spoken. "Where's my daughter?" "Someone took her. A man. He had a gun. He hit me. I tried. I couldn't stop him." Jim Walker called 911 at 1:35 a.m. Fort Worth police officers arrived at Brunswick Ridgely Bowl within minutes of Jim Walker's call. They found blood in the parking lot where Rodney's car had been. They found the .22 caliber magazine dropped by the assailant, presumably in his haste to abduct Carla. They searched the bowling alley. They searched nearby businesses. They interviewed the few people who'd been in the area late at night. No one had seen the abduction. No one had heard screams. The attack had been lightning fast and silent. Rodney was taken to hospital for treatment of his head wounds, 3 deep gashes that required stitches. While doctors worked on him, detectives asked questions. What did he look like? I don't know. It happened so fast. It was dark. He hit me before I could see his face. What about his voice? Gruff. Deep. That's all I remember. The gun? A pistol. Dark. I don't know what kind. It wasn't much to go on, but it was all they had. For 3 days, Fort Worth police and volunteers searched for Carla Walker. They checked motels. They searched vacant buildings. They combed through brush and wooded areas. Carla's photo appeared on every local news broadcast. Tips flooded in. Everyone was investigated. Everyone led nowhere. Jim and Shirley Walker barely slept. They stayed by the phone, praying for a ransom call, a sighting, anything. Rodney McCoy joined the searches despite his injuries. Guilt consumed him. He should have protected her. He should have fought harder. He should have done something. As each day passed, hope faded. February 20th, 1974, 3 days after Carla's abduction, a construction worker was working near a culvert off Highway 377, close to Benbrook Lake. The area was rural, undeveloped, the kind of place people dump trash. Around 2 p.m., the worker spotted something in the drainage ditch that made him stop cold. It was a woman's body. He called police immediately. When Fort Worth officers arrived, they carefully approached the culvert. The body was partially clothed, showing signs of severe trauma. They took photographs. They documented the scene. They called for the medical examiner. By late afternoon, the identification was confirmed through fingerprints. Carla Walker. Detective Mike Adair had the worst job in law enforcement that day, telling Jim and Shirley Walker that their daughter was dead. When he knocked on the door of the Walker home, Jim knew immediately. The look on the detective's face said everything. "We found Carla." Shirley Walker collapsed. Jim caught her, holding her as she screamed. Their other children, Carla's siblings, heard the news and dissolved into grief. Rodney McCoy was at his own home when he got the call. He fell to his knees, sobbing. The Walker family's worst nightmare was confirmed. Carla wasn't coming home. The medical examiner's report revealed horrifying details. Carla had been held captive for approximately 2 days. She'd been repeatedly sexually assaulted. She'd been tortured, beaten with fists and objects. The killer had injected her with morphine, likely to keep her compliant. Finally, she'd been strangled to death. Her body showed defensive wounds. She'd fought her attacker. Skin cells under her fingernails suggested she'd scratched him. There was semen evidence that would be preserved. The cause of death: strangulation. Time of death: approximately 48 hours after her abduction. For 2 days, Carla Walker had been held captive by a monster. 2 days of unimaginable horror. 2 days while Fort Worth searched frantically for her. And then he'd killed her and dumped her body like garbage. Fort Worth Police Department threw everything at the Carla Walker case. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was a premeditated abduction, sexual assault, torture, and murder of a 17-year-old girl snatched from a public parking lot. The entire city was watching. The pressure was immense. The .22 caliber magazine, found at the crime scene, it was traced to a Ruger pistol. Investigators compiled a list of every registered Ruger owner in the Fort Worth area. The semen evidence, preserved from Carla's clothing and body. But in 1974, DNA testing didn't exist. The evidence was carefully stored, waiting for technology to catch up. Witness statements. Detectives interviewed everyone who'd been near the bowling alley that night. They interviewed Carla's friends, Rodney's friends, anyone who might have seen something. But there were no solid leads, no witnesses to the actual abduction, no clear suspects. In April 1974, 2 months after Carla's murder, investigators got a tip. A Fort Worth man named Glenn Samuel McCurley owned a .22 Ruger pistol that used the same magazine as the one found at the crime scene. McCurley was 30 years old in 1974. He'd been convicted of car theft in 1961 and served time. He was now working as a truck driver. Detectives brought McCurley in for questioning. He admitted owning the Ruger pistol, but he claimed it had been stolen from his truck while he was fishing, before Carla's abduction. "Why didn't you report it stolen?" "I'm an ex-convict. I didn't want trouble." Detectives checked his work schedule. On February 17, 1974, McCurley had worked until 4:30 p.m. He was off work the entire next day. His wife had been out of town visiting family. It was suspicious, but McCurley was cooperative. He agreed to take a polygraph test. The result: no deception indicated. Without forensic evidence to contradict him, without witnesses placing him at the scene, investigators had to let him go. Glenn McCurley's name went into the file as a person of interest, but the case moved forward without him. Red herring number 1, the serial killer theory. In 1974, Fort Worth was dealing with multiple unsolved murders of young women. The Fort Worth Star-Telegram ran headlines suggesting a serial killer might be operating in the city. A task force was formed. When the Carla Walker case hit a wall, the task force took it over, believing her murder might be connected to the others. They investigated connections. They looked for patterns. They chased leads across multiple cases. But no solid links emerged. Each case seemed distinct. The MOs were different. The dump sites were different. Carla's case was eventually returned to the original investigators, still unsolved. Red herring number 2, the mysterious letter. In 2019, 45 years after Carla's murder, Fort Worth police received an anonymous letter. The letter contained details about Carla's case, some accurate, some speculation. The writer claimed to have information about the killer. Police released the letter publicly, asking the author to come forward. The author never did. And when Glenn McCurley was eventually arrested, detectives confirmed the letter had no connection to him. It remains a mystery. Perhaps someone who'd heard rumors over the years. Perhaps someone trying to inject themselves into a famous case. As the 1970s turned to 1980s, the Carla Walker case grew colder. The original investigators retired. New detectives inherited the file. The case sat in storage, periodically reviewed but never solved. For Jim Walker, Carla's brother, the passage of time was unbearable. Every birthday, every holiday, every family gathering, Carla should have been there, Jim said. My parents died without ever knowing who killed their daughter. That haunted them until the end. Jim refused to let Carla's case die. He stayed in regular contact with Fort Worth police. He called every few months, asking if there were any updates. He attended vigils on the anniversary of Carla's death. I made a promise to my sister, Jim said. I promised I'd find out who did this. I wasn't going to stop until I had answers. Rodney McCoy graduated from Western Hills High School in 1974 without Carla by his side. He attended college but struggled to focus. The guilt consumed him. He'd been there. He should have protected her. He'd failed. I replayed that night every single day, Rodney would later say. Every single day for 46 years. I wondered if I could have done something different. Rodney eventually married and had a family. But Carla's death left a permanent shadow. He never fully escaped that parking lot. Never fully stopped hearing her scream for him to get her dad. By the early 2000s, DNA technology had advanced dramatically. Fort Worth police began reviewing cold cases, testing preserved evidence with new techniques. In the mid-2000s, the semen evidence from Carla's case was tested. A full DNA profile was developed. It was entered into CODIS, the National DNA Database. No matches. The killer's DNA wasn't in the system. But now, at least, they had his genetic fingerprint. They just needed a way to find him. April 2018. The arrest of Joseph James D'Angelo, the Golden State Killer, changed everything for cold case investigations. The use of genetic genealogy, uploading DNA to public genealogy websites to find relatives of suspects, proved revolutionary. Fort Worth Police Cold Case Unit detectives John Bennett and Leah Wagner took notice. We have DNA from Carla's case, Bennett said. What if we could use the same technique? In 2019, the detectives reached out to Oxygen Network, which was producing a show called The DNA of Murder with Paul Holes. Paul Holes was the investigator who had helped catch the Golden State Killer. Oxygen agreed to fund advanced DNA testing on Carla's case. The DNA evidence from Carla's case, preserved on her clothing for 45 years, was sent to Othram Labs in the Woodlands, Texas. Othram specializes in degraded DNA samples, the kind of evidence that other labs can't work with. We take terrible evidence that other labs don't want to mess with, said David Middleman, Othram's founder. Using cutting-edge sequencing technology, Othram was able to develop a complete DNA profile from the decades-old evidence, something that hadn't been possible before. That DNA profile was uploaded to GED Match, a public genealogy database. The search found relatives, not close relatives, distant cousins, but it was enough. Genetic genealogists began building family trees, working backward from the DNA matches to identify common ancestors, then forward through descendants. The trees kept pointing to one surname, McCurley. Specifically, they narrowed it down to 3 brothers with the last name McCurley in the Fort Worth area. When Detectives Bennett and Wagner saw that name, they froze. McCurley. Glenn McCurley had been in the original case file. Interviewed in 1974. Owned a matching gun. Passed a polygraph. Could it really be him? July 7, 2020. Detectives Bennett and Wagner drove to Glenn McCurley's Fort Worth home. He'd lived there for years, never left the area, never tried to hide. They waited until trash day. When McCurley put his garbage bin out for collection, the detectives obtained it legally. Items from the trash were sent for DNA testing. September 4th, 2020. The results came back. Perfect match. The DNA from Glenn McCurley's trash matched the DNA from semen found on Carla Walker's clothing in 1974. After 46 years, they had their man. September 21st, 2020. Detectives Bennett and Wagner, along with a team of officers, arrived at McCurley's home with an arrest warrant. Glenn Samuel McCurley, now 77 years old, answered the door. He was retired, living quietly with his wife in the same Fort Worth neighborhood where he'd lived for decades. Glenn McCurley, you're under arrest for the capital murder of Carla Walker. McCurley's face showed no emotion, no surprise, no denial. He was handcuffed and taken into custody without incident. At Fort Worth Police Headquarters, McCurley was placed in an interrogation room. Detectives Bennett and Wagner laid out the evidence. The DNA match, the genetic genealogy, the 1974 interview, the stolen gun story. McCurley stuck to his original story from 1974. The gun was stolen. He didn't know anything about Carla Walker's murder. But after hours of questioning, cracks appeared. Finally, McCurley admitted it. Yes, he'd been in the parking lot that night. Yes, he'd abducted Carla. He'd held her captive for 2 days in a location he wouldn't specify. He'd assaulted her repeatedly. He'd injected her with morphine to keep her docile. And when he was done, he strangled her and dumped her body in that culvert. The video of his confession would later be played in court, a chilling account delivered with disturbing calm by a man who'd spent 46 years living a normal life after committing a monstrous crime. August 2021. Glenn Samuel McCurley's trial began at the Tim Curry Criminal Justice Center in downtown Fort Worth. McCurley, now 78, entered the courtroom in a wheelchair, frail, elderly, nothing like the 30-year-old monster who'd abducted Carla Walker in 1974. Tarrant County Criminal District Attorney Sharon Wilson led the prosecution. The case was built on 3 pillars. DNA evidence linking McCurley to Carla's clothing. McCurley's videotaped confession testimony from Rodney McCoy, who faced his girlfriend's killer 47 years later. Detectives Bennett and Wagner testified about the genetic genealogy process, the trash collection, the DNA match. Forensic experts explained how modern technology could extract DNA profiles from decades-old evidence. On the second day of trial, Rodney McCoy took the stand. Now in his 60s, Rodney faced a man who destroyed his life on February 17, 1974. With a steady voice, Rodney described that night in devastating detail. "We just left the Valentine's Day dance. We were sitting in my car, just talking. I didn't see him coming. The door opened and he was hitting me. I saw Carla's face as he dragged her out. She screamed, 'Rodney, go get my dad.' Then he pointed the gun at me. Everything went black." Rodney's testimony was powerful. The courtroom was silent, except for the sound of Carla's family members crying. After 2 days of damning testimony, Glenn McCurley made a decision. On August 24, 2021, he stood before Judge Elizabeth Beach and changed his plea from not guilty to guilty. He pleaded guilty to capital murder. The trial ended immediately. Prosecutors did not seek the death penalty, so the sentence was automatic. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. Jim Walker stood at the podium, looking directly at McCurley. "You stole my sister from us 47 years ago," Jim said. "You stole her from my parents, who died without ever knowing who killed their daughter. You stole her future, the husband she would have had, the children, the grandchildren. You stole all of that." Jim's voice cracked with emotion. "But you didn't win. We never gave up. We kept fighting for Carla. And today, finally, she has justice. Other family members spoke. They described the decades of grief, the unanswered questions, the shadow that had hung over every family gathering. Through it all, McCurley said impassively, showing no remorse. Judge Beach sentenced Glenn McCurley to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He was immediately transported to a Texas state prison. On July 14, 2023, less than 2 years into his sentence, Glenn McCurley died in prison at age 80. He would never fully pay for what he'd done to Carla Walker, but at least he'd die behind bars, his name forever associated with one of Fort Worth's most horrific crimes. For Jim Walker, the verdict brought bittersweet closure. "We finally have answers," Jim said. "After 46 years, we know who killed Carla. We know he's been held accountable. But it doesn't bring her back. It doesn't give my parents the closure they deserved. They died not knowing." Jim reflected on the persistence that finally solved the case. "I never gave up. I called the police every few months for 46 years. I kept Carla's name alive. Because I made her a promise. I promised I'd find out what happened. And I kept that promise." For Rodney McCoy, testify at the trial brought a measure of healing. "For 46 years, I carried the guilt of not protecting her," Rodney said. "I replayed that night endlessly, wondering if I could have done something different. Testifying, facing him, telling the truth, it helped me realize I did everything I could have done that night. I was 17 years old, getting hit in the head with a gun. There was nothing more I could have done." Rodney said he hoped Carla knew that he never forgot her, never stopped caring about what happened to her. "I loved her," Rodney said simply. And even though it's been almost 50 years, that part never changed. In May 2025, U.S. Senator John Cornyn of Texas introduced legislation called the Carla Walker Act. The bill would dedicate federal grant funds to support forensic genetic genealogy, FGG, DNA analysis for cold cases nationwide. Fort Worth native Carla Walker was abducted and tragically murdered in 1974, Senator Cornyn said, but it took more than 4 decades and the advent of forensic genetic genealogy DNA analysis for a killer to be identified and brought to justice. This legislation would make this cutting-edge DNA testing technology more widely available to law enforcement, so they can better identify and prosecute offenders, solve cold cases, and bring closure to victims' families. Carla's name would now be associated not just with tragedy, but with progress, with giving other families the answers they desperately needed. Today, Carla Walker is remembered across Fort Worth. Western Hills High School, now Western Hills High School Legacy Campus, includes Carla's story and discussions about safety and awareness. The bowling alley parking lot where she was abducted has been redeveloped, but locals still remember what happened there on that February night in 1974. A memorial scholarship in Carla's name has been established, helping young women pursue their dreams. The dreams Carla never got to fulfill. On February 16, 1974, 17-year-old Carla Walker went to a Valentine's Day dance with her boyfriend. She wore a pretty dress. She danced with friends. She laughed and made plans for the future, plans that seemed certain, inevitable. She left the dance happy, in love, full of life. Hours later, she was abducted from a bowling alley parking lot by a stranger with a gun. For 2 days, she was held captive and tortured. Then she was strangled and dumped in a ditch like trash. For 46 years, her murder went unsolved. Her family grieved without answers. Her boyfriend lived with guilt. Her community lived with fear. But her brother never gave up. Fort Worth police never closed the case. And when genetic genealogy technology emerged, dedicated detectives used it to finally identify Carla's killer. Glenn McCurley lived 46 years as a free man after murdering Carla Walker. He raised a family. He went to work. He lived in the same city where he committed his horrific crime. But justice, however delayed, eventually found him. The DNA he left on Carla's clothing in 1974, evidence preserved for nearly half a century, became the key to solving her case in 2020. Glenn McCurley died in prison in 2023, just 2 years into his life sentence. It wasn't enough. It could never be enough for what he'd done. But Carla Walker's name is no longer just associated with an unsolved murder. It's associated with persistence, with justice, with the refusal to let violence win. The Carla Walker Act will help solve cold cases across America. Families waiting decades for answers, like the Walkers did, will have hope. And every time genetic genealogy solves another cold case, Carla's legacy will be honored. A 17-year-old girl, stolen too soon. A family that never stopped fighting. A community forever changed. And justice that took 46 years, but finally arrived. Thanks for being here and listening to Carla's story. This case reminds us why families should never give up hope, why law enforcement should always preserve evidence, and why advances in science can bring justice even decades later. Don't forget to hit the bell for our latest stories. Stay safe, watch out for your loved ones, and remember, no matter how much time passes, the truth can still come to light.